Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett joins us now. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us. Before the Fifth Circuit Appeals Court put SB4 on hold, a majority on the Supreme Court had decided to let it be enforced. I'm curious, do you think that signals that the court is open to ruling that the law is constitutional?
I absolutely do believe that. I think that this court has been pretty obvious in their signaling, a little bit more obvious than maybe years past. We saw it happen definitely when it came down to the decision on whether or not Trump would stay on the ballot or not with the Colorado decision. They kind of gave us a signal. We know when the leak decision came out as it relates to Dobbs, we kind of knew what the writing on the wall was going to be, but prior to, they allowed that to go into effect as it relates to some of the Texas abortion cases that were moving through the courts. And so I think that this court has typically kind of signaled and leaned into where they plan to go. And I think that this is a bad sign for Texas and the United States.
Well, Congressman, the way the law appears to be written, it effectively would allow local judges to adjudicate a migrant's legal status without deference to federal law. That would essentially circumvent that huge backlog of cases for asylum seekers. Do you think that that's an effective way to handle that problem?
Absolutely not. I mean, obviously, we have federal jurisdiction, we have state jurisdiction. We know that immigration falls squarely within federal jurisdiction. And so to allow a rogue state like the state of Texas, and yes, I'm calling them rogue, because we know that federal law is supposed to reign supreme. And we know that this is a federal issue. It's a federal issue that Congress actually decided that they wanted to weigh in on and actually do some reforms on until Donald Trump said, do not do anything. Much like what we've seen out of this Congress, it's a do-nothing Congress. The American people should demand more than allowing Greg Abbott and local law enforcement to just do whatever they want to, especially since the law says because you're suspected of entering the country illegally. What does a suspect look like when it comes to entering the country? You know, you guys were just covering what was going on in Arizona. We saw something similar happening in Arizona. The idea that we can racially profile our way out of our immigration problems is just something that we know we can't do. They tried it in New York, they tried it in Arizona, and I guess now they think the third time is a charm. But I can guarantee you that all we're going to do is cause more harm than good. We need the federal government to stand up and do their job, and that means that Republicans may have to rebuke the four-time indicted, well, you know the long list of things to describe Donald Trump, but they need to rebuke him and they need to do the job that they were sent to D.C. to do.
Congressman, on that point about local law enforcement and local police enforcing immigration policy, you pointed out something that critics have repeated. Will say they say it's a huge problem with the law, that they essentially can arrest someone based on their suspicion that they are undocumented, the criteria of which can be nebulous, right? Local officials like
Absolutely.
The police chief, the police chief in Laredo, he's promising that there's going to be more training for officers to make sure that enforcement isn't racially biased. I want you to listen to what he said at a press conference earlier today.
I can tell you that this law is not about us going out there and doing roundups. This law is not about us going out there and asking for papers and immigration status. This is not about that. This law is very clear that whenever we can apply it is through a lawful detention or an arrest. Very important that we train and train and train, because we want to avoid the racial profiling part of this law, that it lends itself for that.
He's saying it lends itself for racial profiling, and perhaps the antidote to that is training. Are you confident that that kind of training is going to prevent discrimination?
I'm absolutely not confident. As someone who has practiced law for 18 years, mostly handling criminal defense cases or doing civil rights cases, I can guarantee you that just as he stated, it lends itself to that. There's only so much racial bias that you can teach someone not to have. Interestingly enough, I just had a conversation yesterday about why there are some proponents of AI and believing that, you know what, no matter who you are, when you put people at the center of something, there will always be some sort of bias. And so it is very concerning because the way that this law is written is going to allow for those bad apples to just go out and cherry pick people based upon them saying, well, I thought that they crossed the border illegally. This is a problem, especially when we start talking about our southern border that tends to have more Latino folk located there. We know that we saw recently law enforcement, I want to say it was Christmas maybe of last year or the year before, where we saw that there was an American family out of El Paso, and there was a tragic death because law enforcement decided to pursue them because they thought they were crossing illegally. That is not enough. This should not pass any type of muster, and the application is going to be disastrous again, as we have seen time and time again. What we need to do is we need to have comprehensive immigration reform. You're absolutely right. When it comes to the backlog, you know what we need to do? We need to pay people to work. That's something that the president has tried to offer time and time again in a supplemental package. And ultimately, when the Republicans rejected that, he said, fine, we will absolutely look at what we're doing as far as immigration and actually reform the immigration system and not just put more money into it. And you know what? They came to an agreement, a very conservative agreement, and that was turned down. It is time for this do-nothing Congress to do something that the American people can rely upon as making sure that they are protecting not only U.S. citizens, but those that are seeking asylum in our country that is supposed to be the land of the free and the land of opportunity.
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, this case appears destined for the Supreme Court. We hope you'll come back to discuss it when it goes before the court.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.